Welcome back, wordsmiths and story seekers. I am your host, Daniel Willcocks, broadcasting from the shadowy halls of Devil's Rock HQ. And tonight I am thrilled to share the writer's chair with the authorial powerhouse that is Matt Serafini. Hailed as one of the best new voices in horror fiction by horror grandmaster Brian Keene, Matt Serafini is a screenwriter and author whose books include Rites of Extinction, Feral, and Under the Blade, which Film Thrills called one of the best slasher films you'll ever read, as well as his brand new social media horror, Feeders. Matt's short fiction has appeared in multiple anthology collections, and he has written extensively on the subjects of film and literature for numerous websites, including Dread Central and Shock to Drop. His nonfiction has appeared in the pages of Fangoria and Horror Hound, and Matt lives on the East Coast with his wife and children. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for that. That was quite a verbose and complimentary intro. I appreciate
I mean,
that.
people say this every time, but like, this is stuff that you've done. Like, these are your credits, and they're pretty impressive, to be honest.
Well, thank you. I never think of it that way. So to me, like when you hear it like that, it's just kind of like, all right, let's get on to the next thing. But thank
Imposter
you. I
syndrome, I see
appreciate
it.
that. It's great to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
excited. I've been really excited to chat with you because it's been a while since we've chatted.
it has, yeah. We've done some stuff behind the scenes. Like I've done some work on your website. We sort of chatted here and that, but we've never really had like a proper sit down conversation about your books,
No,
about your work. So I'm excited to have this because we'll kind of get to Feeders, and I'm very very excited to introduce the audience to Feeders. But I wanted to start in a slightly different place that I'm curious about because on your website in your about section, there's a line that you've written that kind of captured my attention, and I feel like maybe this is just an extra platform to help you realize your dream. So you write, I spend a fair chunk of free time tracking down obscure slasher films and hope to one day parlay that knowledge into a definitive history book on the subject. Until I've had the opportunity to tell everyone about Ogroff the Mad Butcher, I don't believe my life's work can ever truly be complete. Now,
that's
I
true.
know nothing of Ogroff. So
Oh,
by all means, feel free to educate me on
oh.
why this resonates with you so deeply.
It's a movie that defies description. It's an early '80s slasher movie from France. I think it's France. And it is shot. It's almost a silent film. It was shot, I think, 16 millimeter. And it's this really weird kind of regional French horror film where you kind of follow the killer as he goes about like a normal day for him.
Okay.
And um I don't to say any more is literally ruining one of the most outre films you can watch because you can blur I could blur it out like, "Oh, and then it's this," and you would go, "Oh, I've gotta see that." But I don't wanna say that because it really would ruin the pleasure that, yeah, I think you would have of sitting down to watch this film because it's that whacked out. And I
Okay.
and I think, like, the less you know going into it, the better, but just to say that it starts with kind of just this French slasher wandering the lovely French countryside, and, maybe he kills a couple people, and then things really go crazy. I'll
Okay.
I'll leave it there.
All right. You whet my appetite. I'm getting it might not be this entirely, but have you ever seen Rubber?
The Tire movie.
Yeah.
I saw that when it first came out. I had to cover that for, like, Dread Central back in the day, and I don't
Okay.
remember much about it. I remember
No.
thinking it was crazy.
Yeah, I remember coming out of that film and just going like, I don't know if that was like, I don't know if I enjoyed it, but it felt good. Like it's
Yeah.
really like I don't know if I'm kind of getting like those vibes from Ogroff. But how did you first stumble across Ogroff? Am I saying it right as well?
Rough, yeah, I
Yeah.
think you are, yeah. There's another title, I think it's The Mad Butcher, I think was like, a VHS title, so there's that. How did somebody, had mentioned to me, I think they were at, like, a screening in LA, like, a rare screening of it in LA or something, and this was probably 12, 15 years ago, and they it was a good friend of mine that lives out on the West Coast, and he called me up and he was like, you of all people have to see this. And I tracked down like at that time there was a bunch of websites that would sell like VHS dupes and things, and I tracked one of those down and imported it and watched it, and then did the kind of that thing where you just pass the tape to everybody,
Yeah.
being like, you've got to see this. I think there's probably a good YouTube copy of it now, and there's also been a couple DVD releases of it. I think none in the United States. I don't know what your audience breakdown is like, but yeah, I mean, you can kind of find it out there now, and it's just, but it still flies under the radar, and I feel like we're like one good boutique label away from that movie kind of taking off and just like making people go crazy because it's a wild one.
It's a full cult classic in the making.
I think so. And I hate to like say that because it's like I hate that presumptive like I'm gonna tell you what a cult classic is. Like, but I do feel like it's probably pretty close to that. It's because it's just really good. It's really entertaining. Believe me, I know what it's like to, when you hear that sort of the effusive praise of these movies and you go, yeah, okay. Like, because everybody kind of wants to discover a cult classic.
Yeah.
And I'm not like that. I'm not saying like, this is going to be the one. And I know like there's been so many times where I've watched like those movies and have been like, nope,
Mhm.
not even close. But this one definitely is out there in a really entertaining way.
Yeah. Because we should say for the audience that clearly you are something of a film connoisseur. I remember the first time we had one of these kind of calls, you had all your DVDs and all your VHSs and everything in the back. Like you have
But
a
yeah,
lot
yeah,
of,
yeah.
let's say, filmature. I don't know if that's a real word. But
It's a good word, actually.
but what is it about kind of the collection of that kind of stuff that grabs you? Why is that your kind of like go to thing?
Yeah. I think two reasons. I think, if we're going to get into like the nostalgia of things, I think why I like to have a physical collection, beyond like the kind of typical talking points that everybody has, whenever a movie leaves Netflix and then everybody rushes to their social media to go, oh, I have it on my shelf. Like there's that. And yes, okay, I understand that. But when I was a kid, I just remember going to the video store and just, it was like, before the internet, and not to come off like old guy, but I just mean like, back then, like you didn't have access to the information, right? So
Mhm.
when you're in a store, you're at the mercy of whatever is on the shelves. And then you're at the additional mercy is like, I think this movie looks good. You're looking at the cover art's probably pretty awesome, but you still had to kind of be skeptical
Mhm.
because a lot of times the cover art was one thing. And then you're like, oh, this was nothing like the movie promised. But I loved that thrill, the discovery of like, I'm going to parse out my options and I'm going to make an educated guess and bring those titles home and hope for the best. And sometimes it worked out well. Sometimes it didn't work out well at all. But there was that kind of relationship with the movie where you'd kind of like, again, like you were looking at this stuff and, whether the movie was good or not, like nowadays, if it's on streaming, if it's not good, you turn it off and
Mhm.
it's 10 minutes. If it doesn't grab you and you're like, whatever, find something else. Back then you were like, I'm gonna watch this because this is what I chose to watch this weekend, and I
Yeah.
don't have any other choice. This was my choice. And so if it was the worst thing in the world, you'd still watch it. And I kind of I like having a large collection of the films that I kind of rented back then, either films that I've already seen or films that I haven't seen yet. Just to kind of hold on to that kind of feeling, that thrill of hopefully positive discovery. Once in a while, you still find some gems out there.
Yeah.
Um, and then also just I kind of want to pass that on to like my kids. And it's funny because they can either take it or leave it. Sometimes they are interested and they'll look through some of the covers and be like, oh, this looks cool. This looks neat. And other times they could care less. So
Yeah.
couldn't care less. So, that there's some mixed results there. And it really though comes down to me kind of just, remembering kind of that time in my life, which again was, I think, just a little more of, not that I don't love the convenience of streaming and I utilize it all the time, but like I do miss those days of like, I don't know if this is good, but I like looking at this cool artwork and rolling the dice on it. That was like kind of an exciting time to be a movie fan.
Well, the word that springs to my mind, you saying that, is consequence. Like you pay the money, you get the film. That's, you have to, not that you have to live with that consequence, but it's like you say, like, you might as well, you've got it. Whereas now
Yeah,
streaming, as you say, like immediately, no, no, next, 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 which makes for a much harder environment to try and create content that people will like.
much harder. Yeah, and it's way more competitive. And I guess you could get into like horror stories of the algorithm where it's like that's why every movie now should have X happen by minute 15 and blah 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 blah. But even on if you step back from that, it is just because I even find it in myself where it's like a film that 30 years ago, if I had rented it and I would have given it the time. And like nowadays, I find myself sometimes going, I'm a little bored with this after 15 minutes. And I will
Yeah.
still try and give it its fair shake. But I do find that sometimes the way our brains are wired now, there is a little bit more of a temptation to cut and run if
Mm.
you're not all in right away. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I think sometimes you maybe, because I remember seeing films from back in the day where it's like, yeah, you did have to kind of grin and bear it through a first 40, 50 minutes, but then things got really good. Like they were saving their limited budget for like to really kind of throw all those cool effects and things in the last 40 minutes of the movie. And sometimes, as a kid, you would kind of grin and bear it and be rewarded. Whereas now, if you cut and run, like you are missing out on something that does have rewards later on, and you're depriving yourself. So,
Yeah. Do you think that's made its way over into novels as well, or do you think that's still kind of a bit more? You can still have that slower burn experience.
I think no, I think it's definitely made its way into novels.
Mm.
Because I think, if you look at the robust readership out there nowadays, which is great, but you do have, I mean, there's almost too much, right? And people, I see it all the time, DNF. And it's not even because I didn't really like it. It's just because it didn't keep my interest. It didn't keep the pages turning. And I mean, I see so much of that. And it's like, God, the sheer amount of books and, what you can load up on your Kindle if you're an digital reader, it's never ending. And so, yeah, I think there is a temptation to move your story, keep things moving. I remember, reading certain novels back in the day, these big books, and just going like, okay, like I'm getting, not only is this a fiction book, but I'm getting like a history lesson in here, like the way that fiction used to be written, and some of it still is, but the way it kind of will deep dive into certain aspects of its subject, like the example I always go to is just like the Tom Clancy novels, because I used
Mm.
to read those as a kid. And it was like, not only are you getting like a crackerjack spy thriller, but you're getting the history of, submarines, you're getting, the history of, maritime, whatever, these weapons, whatever. And sometimes maybe that's a little too much, but I kind of like that as a kid because it's like, oh, I'm getting additional things out of
Mm.
this. And nowadays, I think it's much more like, short chapters keep things moving. It doesn't always have to be, but I think that what you asked, I think you definitely see that influence in books, of all stripes, really.
Yeah. I think it was in a conversation with Jonathan Jans that he was talking about his frustration with the move towards novella length works rather
Mhm.
than the sort of bigger tomes that come out. I mean, I read Tananarive Jew's The Reformatory last year, which was arguably the longest book I read in a long time. That's about 500-600 pages.
Long
Um,
one, yeah.
and then afterwards, I was immediately like, now I want something shorter just to feel like I can complete, as it were, within a shorter amount of time.
Yeah. They used to call it like there was a rebranding, I think, like 10 years ago where the publishers were like bookshots. And they
Mm.
called it like, and it was just those little novellas, and they would call it a bookshot. And I actually thought that was not a bad little, like, it was probably a stupid, cynical marketing term, but I was like, I know what you mean though, because in your exact example of like, I finished this long book, and like I'm reading, like I had just finished a couple, like, well, maybe it's a month ago now, but I had finished the Buffalo Hunter.
Oh, nice.
Um, and I love almost everything Stephen Graham Jones writes, so I'm an easy mark for him. But that book was, and I really liked it, but it was a read that I had to completely keep my head engaged
Mhm.
during it because it's a lot, and you have to kind of just, it's the way it's written. It's a tough one, and so when it was done, I went right to like a novelization because I was just like, I need the complete opposite of this. It was a good full meal,
Yep.
but now I'm full and
Yeah.
I want a bag of chips after. And so all things are valid. All these things are valid, but
Mhm.
it is, to echo Jan's, um, because what I like about Jan's especially is that Jan's kind of writes like a man out of time in the best way. Like I like that he's keeping, certain older traditions alive. And because those are the kind of books I grew up with, I think that's kind of why I like Jan's, because it's like I'm still getting these kind of like these full meals that are kind of written not necessarily aping the style of like McCammon and stuff, but I
Mm.
can tell where his influences are, and I like that sort of the way he goes about it. And so I would actually agree with him. Like, sometimes when I'm writing and I do feel like a compulsion to for brevity, like I tend to resist sometimes because I'm like, no, I want to write the story I want to write. And if I want to have a little digression that I feel like I can get away with, that I feel like is earned in this piece of the story, like I'm gonna do it, you know? So
Yeah. So, mentioning people like McCammon, where does your horror history take you? How did you find your way into the genre? Who were some of those early influences that got you kind of into the horror bug?
yeah, horror was interesting because I had kind of a couple different waves where like they impacted me differently. Of course, King, and
Yeah.
obviously, I've said that on every every piece of press I've done for feeders so far. I've talked about my where it started with King, so
I
I'll
think
leave
like
that off
95% of horror authors can just say King and then move on.
say King,
Yeah.
and then we can move on. Um, and I'll for me, a couple pivotal books for me were the Keep by F. Paul Wilson
Mhm.
and Michael Slade's Headhunter, which is a very interesting. If you haven't read it, I always recommend Michael Slade's Headhunter. It's a really nasty serial killer novel set in Vancouver in the early '80s. The book came out in the early '80s. Michael Slade is a pen name for. I think the pen name, the identities behind the pen name have changed a little bit over time, but at the time it was three Canadian trial lawyers, and they kind of parlayed their knowledge of procedural of criminal cases into this really chilling serial killer hunt. And um it's really nasty. It is not afraid to go, though it is probably ostensibly a thriller. It wallows so much in horror imagery and horror iconography that I kind of think of it as a horror novel. And it's really dark and really compelling. And those two books, The Keep and Headhunter, I read them when I was way too young to read them. Really, really embarrassing to even like if my mom had known like what she was, because my mom was really great. She wanted to foster my reading habit.
Mhm.
And so she would buy me what she knew I was interested in. But she never knew like the content of the books. So like she was giving me stuff was really, really intense. And I was just like, I was in like fifth grade being
More of that,
like
please.
more of that. Yeah. But it was fantastic. And so from like fifth grade on, I sort of started to kind of beg her to when she would go out, I would, take me to the used bookstores. And I would go and she would, let me kind of just load up on a couple books. Back then you could get these awesome, all the zebra editions for like, a quarter. There's like they were read once and discarded, and then you get them for a quarter. And so those two books and those two authors, because I then would read them voraciously and others too, but those two were kind of pivotal at a young age for a young Matt, reading King, Wilson, Slade, definitely huge for me. And then when I got into high school, um, and this probably, since you've read Feeders, you probably will not be surprised. But I got my hands on a copy of American Psycho.
Mhm,
And so, that book was always kind of like, whoa, and a huge, Bret Easton Ellis just in general
mhm.
was a huge influence, especially on Feeders. There was one review that kind of said, of Feeders, when I read through Feeders, I couldn't believe there wasn't a grateful acknowledgement to Bret Easton Ellis. And I'm like, to me, it's like that, not a secret. Like, and then when I went into college, that's really when I was kind of wondering, like, do I want to write? Do I want to do this? And that was kind of right around the time of leisure books. And so I was going into Borders and buying Brian Keene and, all the books that Leisure was putting out, JF Gonzalez and um, obviously Richard Lehman. And, just they were republishing all of his stuff. And so it's kind of those three waves. And then those guys were really kind of showing me like, well, the genre is alive and well. And not only that, but, this is what I want to write. My first book, Feral, was sort of written to be a submission to Leisure. And then Leisure ended up like collapsing, like right as I was done the book and was about to start sending it out, was like Leisure. So, but if you like, for people that, maybe familiar with my backlist, like those early novels, the first couple that I wrote were very much like leisure. They were leisure books. Like I wanted them so badly to be leisure paperbacks alongside, all those kind of next string of influences that really were the authors that kind of said to me, you can do this, you should do this. And, that's Keene, especially, who's
Mhm.
just been like a really amazing um, friend to me and everybody in terms of anybody that kind of is trying to cut their teeth,
Mhm.
in the genre. Like, it's amazing to have somebody like Keene who's just kind of like there to, you know, encourage you a little bit. It's pretty cool. So I
Yeah.
hope that's an answer to your question. That was a
Oh,
long-winded answer.
absolutely. No, no, absolutely. So it must like I'm putting myself in kind of like your shoes of, you grew up reading these Keen books, you spoke about him a lot on this, and obviously like he's blurbed you, calling you
Right.
one of the new great voices in horror. What does that feel like to have that kind of maybe validation is a sumptuous word, but to have that kind of recognition from someone who you've admired for so long?
I think validation is the word. I think, but it's not validation. You have to be careful because, like, I'm always careful when I talk about it in those terms because it's like I don't mean it, in like a gloating way, like yeah, yeah, in your face, like. But to me, it's like we're all neurotic people, and I think when you're first putting your work out there, and you're like, is anybody going to read this? Is
Mm,
anybody going to care about it? And everybody, it's like the number one question for me is people coming up to me going like, how do I start? And it's just like, you just start and that's it really. But when you do get like that first blurb, it just, you take a second and you just go, well, I did something, like, so the validation is more like for oneself, where it's like, I feel like I did do this, and whether I, do it long term or whatever, like, it just feels like you kind of feel relief. Like it's like, okay, I am here, and somebody I admire looked at my work and said, yeah, you got the chops, and that, so it's kind of like just like a, you know,
yeah.
um, I've always kind of said about all my books, it's like the only, like, people can love or hate. I don't care. I'm pretty unflappable with in terms of feedback, in terms of reviews. I've gotten plenty of bad reviews. And to me, it's like the only thing that really shakes me is like if people are like, the man can't write.
Hmm.
Like that's the only one that's like, God, you don't want that. And even, I think everybody does, you do get one of those every once in a while here and there.
Yeah.
But I think like, but after a while you start to just realize like, no, I can,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. It's just not for
Um,
you.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of what it felt like. And I'm sure that do you agree with that, or as a writer yourself, like, do you feel like there's other kind of things that happen when you get that kind of a blurb?
Think it no, it totally makes sense. I think it's a bit of a journey. Like you go from getting those first sort of reviews, and because you've only got one or two, they really have that weight on your opinion of yourself because you just have a small sample size. But you get to the point where you bring in more and more reviews, and like you say, you start almost filtering out like, oh no, I'm clearly good in that I have people who appreciate the book. Yeah,
Yeah,
for me, I've got a background in digital marketing and all that kind of stuff, and you begin to learn that like your book isn't going to be for everyone, and like it's not meant to be. In the same way that I don't know if I've told this story in the podcast, but like the first time I ever properly like because I wrote a few short stories at college and at school, and I was in like a few sort of mini anthologies, but all the class was, you know what I mean? Like so, I kind of played with writing, but the first time I sat down and was like, I'm going to write a short story. I'm going to give it all, and it was about 1,000 words. My granddad used to be in the fire brigade, and so I was kind of like influenced by him. It was not horror in any way. Anyway, it was kind of biopic, fictional-ish. And I remember handing that to my mum and going, "What do you think?" And my mum looking at it and like me going like, "It's a story about your dad, mum," and like it's this, and me thinking like, I put so much effort into this. And she looked at it and like I have no like grudge against her for this, but she looks at it and just goes, "Huh," and then hands it back, and I'm like, maybe she's not my audience. There's so many
that's
people.
not what I was expecting.
No, just like, "This is amazing." No, it was, like, kind of dismissive in a in a way, but for me, all I learned from that was, like, there are so many authors who and I did it myself, friends have done it themselves, like, the first books you put out, you give to friends, you give to family, you give to the next door neighbor who is a teacher, and
Yeah,
for me, as time's gone on, I've learned that they're not my audience, so while their opinion does, matter in some way, like, that's not where I should be pointing my attention to getting that kind of, again, like, validation quote. And then when you get to a point when you do get those words from someone that you do admire, it does kind of I think for me, it was almost like I guess like the final sort of sticker on the page. Like you
Yeah.
have sort of just like ultimately readers are the ones I feel that matter most because that's who you're writing for.
uh,
But
Well said. Well
yeah,
said.
but when you have that external validation from someone that you do know, you do appreciate, you do respect, it does just give you that little bit of a flip. Like I had a short story last year accepted into my first what I call big publication. Like I'm next to Rachel Harrison, I'm next to Adam Cesare, or
Yeah.
Caesar, and like a few names of people that like I've been reading for ages.
Yeah.
That has given me that kind of like extra cementing of
Of
confidence in my
course.
work. But
Right.
it's not, it's not defined how I write or who I write for.
That's a perfectly put. And I think that's all the right reasons. And I think like because you do like you want I think what every writer should kind of figure out, and the earlier the better,
Mhm.
is that in this game, it's the readers. The readers are they're our lifeline, and they're going to decide whether we go the distance or not. And so to me, it's like that other stuff. When I started, I had a moment where I realized, like, or yeah, I should say, I had a moment early on, a couple years in, where I was probably unhealthily. I really wanted blurbs. I was like,
Yeah.
I want, blah blah blah, and it wasn't to feed my ego, but it was in a way. It was like I just need to know. I need to know I belong here
Yeah.
and blah blah blah, and and then I realized as soon as I kind of I was having this conversation with friends of mine and stuff. And then I just realized like, but that's not really what you want. Like what you
Mm.
really want is just to be able to do this and to just keep doing it. And the way that you do that is to get readers who will take a chance on your book.
Yeah.
And I think that there are some writers that really get um they overemphasize, kind of the kind of cool kids club aspect of like,
Yeah.
all these people blurbing me or whatever. And that's great. I'm not disparaging, because blurbs I think do actually help
Mhm.
sell books. So I'm not disparaging blurbs, but I think like it's easy to get lost in that.
Yeah.
And I think really it's like that's fine, but just remember, you know, it's about readers. It's about readers. Like
Yeah.
our readers are why we do this. We're storytellers.
Yeah.
And if we don't have anybody to tell our stories to, then we're shouting into a hurricane.
Yeah. It's almost like just for me, I almost see it as like just a tool in the bigger game. Like, because you
Right.
do, I mean, this can go into a whole deep conversation that I'll try and avoid because I want to talk about your book.
Sure,
But
sure.
you do have the layers of, like you say, the readers, the core, that's who we're writing for. Like, without them, we don't live. But at the same time, if you want to go into kind of the more, I guess, what's the word? Kind of higher gravitas places, like more in bookstores, more with awards, that kind of thing, then definitely that's where it becomes a bit more about peers. And, there is a game to it. There are sort of rules to play and different ways to do it, which
Yep.
I think some people don't admit, but they definitely exist. Like they're there.
Right?
And so, yeah, it's navigating what you want to do as a writer as to what that kind of priority is. And I think, when you start off, it should be about the reader and it should be about the foundations of writing the story, getting to there. And it's only really I've been published now for 10 years. And it's only really been in the last year or two that I've started actually getting some of these blurbs here and there and picking them up just to build that arsenal to try and get to that next level.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good thing to say too, because that's similar to my experience. I mean, it's like I think some people I've seen try and get into it, and then they get into it for a couple years, and then they go, they get discouraged, and it's
Yeah.
like you got to be stubborn, and you've got to really like don't give yourself a time limit. Just put your head down. And if you really need to do this, just put your head down and do it, because it'll take however long it takes, and be
Yeah.
prepared for it to take over 10 years. Cause that again, that's how it shook out for me. And it sounds like, you're saying the same thing, which is and fairly common from,
Mhm.
what in my experience and talking to others.
Yeah, I think it was Josh Malerman I was talking to, and he was saying about how before Bird Box obviously went off and did its huge thing as part of his band, which I cannot remember the name of from the top of my head. But on the road, he had written about 20, 30 books already that weren't published, weren't with agents, but it was just a backlist. He was just enjoying it. And then he had this sort of arsenal to go like, what do you want? Here's a
Yeah.
here's a menu of stuff.
Yeah. Here's what I've got.
Yeah. Yeah. But he's in many ways an anomaly, and that's a whole different conversation. But also just kind of touching, this will be my really smooth segue. You ready? So the last couple of months, I rarely get to a point where I read a book and I'm really into the pages and I really enjoy it. And that's not to say that I'm reading bad books, but like that always seems to be, I find a really good book that I devour. And then there'll be
Mhm.
kind of like a bit of a slower sort of curve over the next few books of trying to find something that resonates. And then I'll find another one and I'll just eat it alive. And I was fortunate enough to have feeders, which genuinely really enjoyed, and we'll definitely get into the questions now. Um, Followed by Malaman's Incidents Around the House, which
Oh, wow.
took me, and like both of them just one after the other. And I just felt very, very lucky in that moment to be like, I've just had an experience of like two at once. But you know, diving into feeders in this incredibly smooth segue, tell the
It
listeners,
was a good segue.
thank you. Tell the listeners a little bit about feeders, what it is, the story, and where it came from.
Sure. Elevator pitch is that Feeders is a dark web social media app that rewards really bad behavior,
Mhm.
the worst behavior you can imagine. And it comes onto the phone of a teenage girl, Kylie, who, there's been some chatter about rumors about a missing classmate, and they get wind that this classmate had also used this app, and that's sort of why Kylie gets wind of it. And at first it's sort of like, hey, we're going to see what happened here. And then it kind of is this downward spiral into, what happens when it sort of takes over your whole life. Because what she finds is that, it does reward her for doing certain things and acting a certain way. And she finds a certain liberation in that. And yeah, and we follow her on this path. I won't say any more
Yeah,
than that.
that's fair. Yeah, I will. I'll read my review. I don't know if you would have seen the review, but I'll read what I put on a Goodreads for this because,
Oh, did
uh,
you? Oh, cool. Thank you. I haven't actually, I tend to like be very selective just because I'm like,
yeah,
I, yeah,
yeah, you don't.
I'm a
It's a
sensitive
rabbit hole.
soul. Like I'm,
Yeah,
I'm, I love the reviews, but I don't like go like prowling them obsessively just because I'm like, yeah.
there you go. I'll just give it to you straight into your face so you can't escape this one. But it was a positive one, so I'll say that to start with. I put depravity, thy name is monolife. Often I find myself yearning for the book that's going to grab me by the ears and not let me go. I was hooked from the first page with this masterful reflection of social media that steps beyond the glass and showcases just how easily people can fall prey to their own ego. My first Serafini, and sure as hell, not my last. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, like I worked on your website, I've seen all of your books.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I'm really glad that this was sort of the first book I jumped into. And I'm
Me
only just
too.
now making the connection of your screenwriting background and this book because of the pacing and the dialogue and that kind of stuff. But yeah, what I liked most about this book was it felt current. It felt very, very fucking relevant to so much of what's going on today. It's very unashamed in the dark places it goes to. And for me, the kind of relationship between Kylie and her best friend Erin is so relatable for just this kind of like modern audience in this time that we live in. How did you compile the pieces of this story in order to create what you have?
It started with me looking inward as a writer. And, I was watching these YouTube videos and stuff about promoting your work and how, you got to have an online presence and you've got to do this and you got to do that. And the more I kind of internalized that stuff, the worse I felt. And that was kind of the beginning of it back in maybe I want to say like 2017 or something. Like I just come up with these increasingly exhausting and stupid ways to try and like do a social media post about my book, and just like I said, I just was like, I remember one night just being like, I feel like I'm like shredding my dignity here. Like it made me feel like garbage. And that was sort of the kind of first steps. And and then you just kind of like, I realized like, okay, like at the same time as that, I'm just watching all these different social medias and the way that people I was having a conversation with somebody and they were very performative online. I'm going to be careful because I don't want to say anything that's going to out them. There's not anybody in the scene, so I'm not really worried about that. But And I think we were talking one time and I kind of asked them about something they had posted, which was this, indignant sort of social media fodder that always performs well. And they conceded to me that like, yeah, like sometimes you just kind of, you know, puff up your opinion, just make it a little more extra to,
Mm.
to, you know, And I was just like, that's so fucking cynical. But also at the same time, I was like, but I feel like a lot of people do that.
Mm.
And I can't prove it. But I remember just thinking back then, like hearing that and just looking at like so much of what people say. And I'm like, there to me is a performative aspect to
Yes.
all of this stuff. And because there's just no way that you can be that outraged about everything all the time. Like it just never ends, you know? And at the same time, like you, my background um, was in marketing. And I was at the time a website and social media manager for a university. And I remember, you know, going to these conferences and talking to folks about, you know, social media platforms and how they you know, would keep you on their platform all day if they could, and how there's this sort of we don't ever want you to leave. And so what the algorithms do is they keep you angry. They keep you because if you're angry, you're engaged. And if you're engaged, you're responding to things, you're posting things, and it creates this sort of doom loop where you that you can't get out of. And I remember kind of seeing that and wondering like, do people know that they are in these doom loops of in a way of their own making, but in a way also like we're all victims of this algorithm. And some of us know it and don't care. Some of us know it and try and step back. Some of us do the necessary evil, whatever it is. You know what I mean? No judgment. I get it. But that was kind of where I came up with Mono Life. And I was like, well, let's see. Let's tell this story about this platform that is so evil as a way of kind of just contextualizing all these things I just talked about. And then after that, I started thinking about who's an interesting character for this. And you know, anybody that's followed the Feeders press tour, I know I've talked about this a little bit, you know, online. But one of the things for me was you could easily do this story in a different way. And the first instinct that came to my head that I sort of cast aside was to make kind of just a standard supernatural detective story where it's like, here's this app. What's it about? And we follow this kind of, you know, Naomi Watts in the ring, you know, looking at this kind of thing. And there's characters in Feeders that could have taken us on that story.
I pictured immediately. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of them actually. And I was like, I don't want to tell that story. To me, what's interesting is if you tell that story, and you know, like I said in a different interview, I said, you know, what about a teenage Patrick Bateman? You know, like what if that was our way into this story? Because that's interesting. And so those pieces they came together in that way, and that was kind of how I put it all together. And I put it all together, going, I don't know where that actually goes, you know, what the hell is this character going to do with this information? And so I went off and started writing it.
Yeah. And you're very, how to say it. So the main character, obviously, Kylie, is a young girl, a teen girl. Um,
Mhm.
I always marvel at people that can write what, you know, I don't have the perspective of it is what it is to be a teenage girl. Like, and I know that, you know, realistically you don't as well. But from what I read of that book, it really does seem to capture an authenticity of that kind of experience. Those dynamics where, you know, like whether people like to admit it or not, there is more pressure on young girls than there is on young guys, and especially with
Yeah.
social media apps and
Yeah.
platforms and all those expectations delivered to. How did you approach creating Kylie and bringing that authenticity to the stable? Because like one of the things that um surprise is the wrong word, but you know, you wrote this or started formulating this in around 2017. You said that
Yeah.
you finished the idea before COVID.
Yeah.
You know, during COVID, we were speaking a little bit just before we started. There was this kind of acceleration of technology, and obviously this necessary need to connect digitally because of the pandemic. And so, but for me, I would never have guessed that. Reading the book, it very much felt like, you know, a today story, which is mad when you think of like how quickly social media apps develop, different trends develop, that kind of stuff. So how did you tap into that and bring that into life in a way that for a guy speaking from a guy's experience
Yeah. Yeah.
felt
Yeah.
to me kind of authentic?
So I mean, I had a really interesting experience in that I would hire you know, college age, first year college students to come work on, you know, work marketing with us. And we had brought them in. And it was my job to sort of, you know, read the resumes, do the interviews, hire them, and then design their work plan to work on social media and you know, give them direction in terms of like what, you know, what do we want these little interns basically to do. And so, that was my kind of kingdom was I would work with these kids and I was like, these kids are all interesting in that they're all from very different walks of life. They were all like first gen college students. And I don't know if it's if generationally, if this is a new thing, but they seemed younger to me than I thought I was at the age of 18, 19. And I don't know if that's true or not. But because I think, obviously when you get older, you have the perspective and you look back and you're like, I wasn't. So I don't know. I don't know. And I don't judge because I really liked working with these kids. They were all very nice kids. They all did a bang up job for me, doing marketing in a way that I couldn't do because I was like, I'm an old guy. Like I'm not going to be able to reach, a young demographic, so I wanted to have like kids speaking to kids basically, students. And but I would get to know them as workers and as people. And one of the interesting things was that they all saw influencer as a valid career path. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Cause I was, and I would be the cliched parent and go, well, make sure you have a backup
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah.
um, but it was funny because they sort of in a way became the impetus for Kylie because I was what I realized was they all had similar pressures and a lot of it was physical. It was like, I don't like to put myself on camera because I'm not thin enough or I'm not pretty enough or I'm not hot enough, whatever it was. But also, pressures about the world, the geopolitical stuff, social political stuff. Or just right down to like, I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to afford to buy a house. Like all that, for as different as these students were, their answers were almost all the same in terms of like the stuff that they were worried about, and so for me, I'm not a 19-year-old girl, but I was like, I think I can bring this character to life, having had, years of experience working with these students. Um, and it was interesting because there was a sort of changeover where they went from millennial to Zoomer. And that was interesting too, because then it's like there's a change there too.
Yeah.
And that was almost another aspect where I was like, oh, I've got to kind of tailor this now, because the book took so long when I was doing like my editing and working with an editor and stuff. I ended up kind of doing like kind of some extensive revisions on Kylie just because it's like now she's younger, now she's from a different generation and so that was actually another thing. But yeah, that's kind of where it came from. I had a lot of kind of hands-on experience working with, these people who probably it was one of their first jobs, to come work for me doing planning out social media posts and doing, man on the street stuff and covering events for, and that's what they did that I couldn't do. And so it was, but I got to know them very well. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad that comes through in the book.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Really, really does. Um, because of what I've learned about your love of slasher and Bret Easton Ellis, a question which is probably a bit unfair to people that haven't read the book yet, because there won't be spoilers in this, but how much did you enjoy writing the climactic scenes?
Oh man.
Because they were
You
wild.
I knew that so I lie a little bit when I said that I didn't know where the book was going. Pretty early on, I knew it was going to end there.
Yeah.
And I had kind of because at the beginning of the process, when I was creating Monolife, and I knew, you had kind of the rules of Monolife. I knew what the kind of inverse of that was going to be. So I was always kind of writing towards where it goes. And I kind of in a way I couldn't wait to get there because I was like I cannot like it was like you're kind of like revving up and being like I'm just very excited to get there and so it was that's the most fun and the most fun I've probably had writing anything was sort of that that last stretch just because it's like that's the book, that was the reason to do it. And there was when I got representation for the book, there was one agent who said to me, and I didn't sign with them. But they said to me, "You're going to change the whole last 100 pages of the book," and I was like, "No," it was like that's a non-starter. Because to me, it was like everything builds in the book, like structurally, everything works towards that. What I hope is the payoff, And I was like, so no, I can't do that. It's like it's too in ground in the story to redo that. I mean, that was like the one thing that I was like, I don't want to do. Thankfully, there was another agent that liked it, and even more thankfully that the publisher was really fully on board with it, which kind of surprised me in a weird way. But I'm thankful they were.
Yeah, it does. It does very much feel like just a euphoric unleashing of just here are all the bits and pieces that you've gone through throughout the book just comes out at once. Like I think one of the things that I really like supernatural elements. I really like kind of the unexplained, and there's elements of that in there, and particularly in sort of
Mm.
like the climax. You have so many things going on that, in a good way, it's dizzying. Like trying to
Yeah.
follow what's going on here, how this person is here, where that's going, and it's definitely kind of like the climax that I enjoy to see. For people that haven't, for the people that do read it, what is there a particular message or is there a particular experience that you want them to have as an outcome of this book?
I don't want to tell anybody what they should get out of it, because I've seen some pretty fun reactions so far, and I don't just mean positive ones. I've seen some negative ones that I've thought were pretty fun, and like I'm like that's fair, like I'm not who am I to tell you, what you. But um, one thing that I would hope people get out of it is maybe just sort of that you don't need to post 85 selfies a day, or I don't need, keep that moment. Just get don't post it. Like, just, you know what I mean? Like it's like, you don't need to parse your whole life, piece by piece, and put yourself out there because you never know what's out there. You know what I mean? And really, like, I think there is something to be said for, like, I don't want the book to be seen as like a moral panic, like old
Yeah.
guy being like, get offline because I'm on social media. It's had its positives for me. It's had some negatives, but it's largely had its positives. And so I don't want it to come off like that. But at the same time, it's sort of like, let's just think about where we are at this moment. Because one thing I'm not completely convinced of is that the world we know right now in terms of social media, it's already evolved a bit. If you think back to like MySpace and the
Mm.
early days of Facebook, it's evolved a bit. It's changing. I get the sense that people are exhausted by it. And I don't know where it's going to go. But I think and I'm not a good predictor. I can comment on our current moment, but I'm not a good, like, I'm going to tell you where we're going. But I do get the sense that, like, we will wind up kind of in some new iteration of former spaces, which are quieter, maybe smaller, less centralized. And I think part of that is because we all want a little bit more privacy. We want a little bit more of ourselves to be offline just for us. And so, what do I want you to take away from it? Just a little introspection. How about that?
Can I tell you what I think might happen in the next couple of years? 'Cause I thought about this the other day based on,
Yeah. Oh, I would love to actually hear that. Yeah.
so this is not really informed by anything. It's just more just what I've kind of seen on my own feed. But with the introduction, or the heavy introduction, I should say, of AI and AI generated content, I'm beginning to
Uh,
see on my feed and a huge increase in the amount of videos and things that are produced with AI, to the point that I'm getting more and more aware that even the content I'm looking at isn't people. So for me, that's almost becoming a point where I predict, we'll see where this goes. I predict that the content, the market will get so flooded with AI content that people are going to find those smaller spaces. They are going to potentially find those more physical realities in which you can talk to people again and maybe reconnect. And I think, depending how big that wave is, it might bring us back a little bit to kind of like the smaller in-person communities that I do think that society is missing at the minute.
I think we are missing it because I do think that when the last decade, the last 15 years, we've gotten to the point where it's very easy to dehumanize somebody who is just a
Mm.
screen name and an avatar. And that doesn't make me comfortable. I'm a very, like, at the end of the day, as cynical as I could be, I do kind of it's like I do love my neighbors. I love the people that I am in a community with, and I don't agree with all of them like, by any damn stretch of the imagination. But it's tough because it's like when you look at the world, it's like it's like I'm not comfortable writing it all off in terms of like, well, F these people,
Yeah.
and you know what I mean? Like it's so it's hard to kind of feel good sometimes about that when it's like, whereas like when you're sitting with somebody face to face
Mhm.
in a community, and it's like you do have to kind of reconcile that there are differences, but like where do we go? Like where do we go from there? Like I'm not, we're not going to fight. I hope
Yeah.
not. um, so I don't know. Like, but I agree with you, and I think that there is, and especially with the AI. Like, I'm not gonna be an AI doomer, like, because people get that's another like people really love to tell you that they hate AI.
Yeah.
I don't especially like it either. I don't like the aesthetics of it.
Mhm.
And when I see those videos, it does. I think whoever coined the term slop for AI, I mean, I think was really right on the money
Yeah.
because it does just kind of hit you as like this fucking slop that I don't want to see it. Like
Mhm.
it just fills me sort of with this gross. All right, I'm just gonna X out of
I
it.
guess when real people are wasting my time on reels and stuff, and then when it's like people who created robot content,
Right.
that makes me angry. But
Yeah, make a skit. I'm fine with that. Like
yeah.
I'm with you. Like I'll give it the benefit of the doubt, but when it's just God. But yeah, and I think that's I think a pretty prescient prediction. I mean, because I do think as we reach that critical mass, people are
Mhm.
going to look for whatever alternative is like human spaces,
Yeah. Well, people can't
especially when
keep
you
up
get to like right, and you don't know. You're gonna not know. We're not gonna know. Like, is this other person we're engaging with? Are they even a? Is it even a person anymore, or is it just a? You know what I mean? Like, there's that now.
Yeah.
So what does the next 5 years look like? It's not pretty.
Yeah. That is like, and I'm aware we're potentially running a little over time. Are you still okay for time?
I'm
I'm
okay for
enjoying this
time. Yeah,
conversation.
yeah,
But yeah,
same.
like when I have sort of younger writers or like family and friends, and they're like, "Are you worried about AI with writing?" The answer I always come back with is like, "AI writing, it's out of the box. Like, there's nothing I can do about it. It's only going to get better. People are going to use it. That's going to exist. That's just there. The same way that
Yeah,
people would plagiarize and copy books and sell those on the black market. Like, there's nothing I can really do about that as a single person.
right.
What I try and impress upon people is the importance, particularly today, of creating communities and creating a fan base because if you can stand out as an authentic human who is creating content in a genuine way, as genuine as you can, and you have these people and you build this base and they know to come to you for that content, then that's all I need is that one person to come in today, another person to come in tomorrow, and to build that raft. And then like anything else, like, it's just out there. That's not my problem. But if I can write and produce enough and keep enough people happy that they want to come back to me, that's where my success will lie.
It's very well said because I think what the individual can do
Mm.
is you're going to do something that AI wouldn't think to do, right? I won't, no spoilers, but my next book, which I haven't announced, I haven't sold it,
We're getting
but
an exclusive.
we're getting an exclusive. My agent looked at it and he just got back to me and with notes and stuff, and so that's where it is. But he said, "Boy, this couldn't be any more you."
Amazing.
And
Yeah.
so like I mentioned that just to say because he's like it's got this, and these are all things like these are intrinsically together. They're intrinsically you,
Yeah.
and I think that's what we all I think need to do is really try and kind of curate like what we as storytellers can give a reader that is intrinsically us because yeah AI will get better and better in terms of putting together a competent soup to nut story, but it's never gonna be able to do that. It's never gonna take like what makes me my interests and take you know these things and smash them together in a
Yeah.
way that like, and I think that's what we need to rely on is like that we still have that edge, which is to say, you know, hey, no one's going to tell you, you know, this next book, like, yeah, there's a lot of books out there that if you give it the high level view, it's more of an action thriller than it's anything else. This time, I kind of went out of the genre a little bit. Still got horror in it,
Yes.
but it's like from that level, yeah, there's all these books that are the same or sound similar at that level. But once you start peeling back the layers and you're like, oh, it's this and it's this and it's this, like, yeah, that's only Matt would probably put those things together. And so that I think is I think that's the value that we're going to give our readers, as we kind of continue to refine our personas to the extent that they're personas. I mean, that's who I am. It's like I'm telling stories that only it's all I know how to do. And it's only a story that I think like no one else would probably tell this story. And I think that's the good of it.
That's all we can do as authors. Is is there anything else you'd like the listeners to know about feeders before we go into a last little segment that I call the quickfire round, which is just for fun and not as scary as it sounds?
No, I mean, I think like I hope people will give it a chance. I think like for me, it's it's the best horror novel I think I can write, and which is why my next book is something else. Because I was just like when I got to the end of Feeders, I was like, I'd written other stuff after Feeders that has come out, but like I got to Feeders and I was like, I think like for now I'm done, like because I just not done, but
Yeah.
like it's just like I need a break because it's like I can't do a better horror novel than this. To me, it's like it came out exactly as I wanted it to come out. But honestly, like if you like anything that's satirical, that's funny and fucked up, I mean, I hope you'll give it a shot. And however you give it a shot, there's a great audiobook by Devon Savare. She really captured Kylie in a way that I was delighted by. And I think it's cool because I don't know if she necessarily wants me to advertise this, but she was in a Hellraiser sequel, so I think
Oh,
that's
amazing.
wicked cool. um, but so I mean, yeah, and however you want to try it is good with me. But like please give it a shot. Please give it a shot and let me know what you think.
I second that. I do highly recommend it. It was a absolutely fantastic and just so full of twists. Like you don't get that often these days. I find with books, but like there was a lot of like just 1 minute we're here and then the next minute we're in somewhere that I had no expectation
Mm.
we would be going, and there's a lot of that all through the book.
Oh, well, that's fun. I'm glad it worked that way.
Yeah, so buy it, people, and the link will be in the show notes for anyone that doesn't want to click through and just purchase Feeders by Matt Serafini. As I mentioned, I have a little quick fire round. It's just for fun. It is
Yeah.
10 questions that I throw at you as quickly as possible. Feel free to answer as quickly as possible. I always say quickly as possible. There are people that like to go into longer things. That's fine. As I say, however you want to take this. But 10
Okay.
questions to throw at you. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, let's go.
Sweet. Dragons or robots?
Robots.
You get turned into an animal for the day. What are you?
Cat.
Typewriter or touchscreen?
Typewriter.
Jaws or Jurassic Park?
Jaws.
Could you survive a week without your phone?
Yes.
If Feeders was a drink, what drink would it be? What's one book you wish?
That's
I'm going to try that. What's one
hard
book
and
you...
sweet.
What's one book you wish you'd written?
Ooh.
I mean, we've touched on a few possibilities in the conversation, but not going to steal.
I know, and that's the thing, and it's like I don't want to go to those. You know what? I'm gonna throw everybody off. Michael Crichton's Congo. I
Nice.
love that.
I'm yet to read a Crichton. I've got a few. I've not read them.
He's really good, and that's a fun one. And a lot of people who've only seen the movie will then go to the book and go, "Oh, that's a lot more of a serious version of that story," and it's really cool. I love that book.
I have to keep an eye out for that one. Are you prepared for the zombie apocalypse?
Yeah, yes, but my house would make a really shitty place to try and hold them off. So maybe no.
Yeah. Describe Feeders in 3 emojis.
Well, that's the cover. Fire, knife, skull.
Wonderful. What one book would you recommend above all others, excluding your own?
The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis.
Wonderful. And that's 10. But I've got a bonus question, which is where can my listeners find out all about yourself and everything that you're working on?
Probably Instagram. I still have a Twitter, but it is, Twitter like is to me is I'm there because it's a habit at this point, and Instagram is where I'm more active and posting daily. So
Sweet. I'll pop links
come
for
find me on Instagram.
yeah. I'll pop links for that in the show notes.
Okay.
And that's a wrap. So thank you so much, Matt, for joining us this week on the Writer's Share podcast.
Thank you, Dan. I can't believe that was an hour. Like I'm like blown away. That seemed like 3 seconds.
Just mosey through, always the best ones. And an especially big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in. Before you dash off, if you're craving deeper conversation, writing advice, or just fancy hanging out with fellow readers and storytellers, come join the Devil's Rock community on Discord. I'm on a mission to build the largest online space for fans of horror and dark fiction, a home where writers and readers can connect, create, and thrive together. It's free, open to all, and always crackling with inspiration. So if you're ready to pull up a virtual chair, head on over to devilsrockbooks.com/podcast for the invite link. And until next time, my friends, write bravely and dream dark.